So looking at the title, you're probably thinking that's cap, but there actually is a hidden benefit of doing so in the short term. Studying 1 hour per week helped me save hours of doing bullshit tasks. And at the end of this video, you'll be able to do so too. So back in year 10, I remember getting to school after each weekend, and it was like a competition to see who studied the most.
So study 10 hours on the weekend.
Rookie numbers, brother.
And I'll be honest, I would feel really guilty when I didn't study as much as some of my classmates. And so I did the dumb thing and thought, I'm going to study more and be like everyone else. And so there was this time period in year 10 where, apart from sleeping and eating, I would just be at my desk at home. And I felt productive studying 8 hours a day. But I guess the important word here is I felt, because there was almost this false sense of comfort that comes from studying a lot. But the thing is, whenever it got to class time and the teacher picked on me to answer a question, I would just blank out, because it was like I never digested the content in the first place. And that's especially embarrassing after spending like a third of your time studying. So in other words, sitting down did not equal to studying. And so from that, I realized two things. First, no one cares how many hours you studied. And second, most people that claim to study 8+ hours a day, like myself at the time, are either procrastinating or doing inefficient things, but also shallow tasks, like making extremely aesthetic notes or highlighting the textbook. These are all things that can take up 8 hours of your time, but won't actually do much to change your exam grades. Now, you might be saying there's still a tiny benefit in doing these shallow tasks, and you might be right, but why do we want to settle on a small piece of the pie, like everyone else? Instead, you want to be doing the thing that will give you the most benefit. And I learned this from a somewhat old book, but good advice overall. It talks about the reason people seem to work or study for 8+ hours. And the reason is because they waste all their time doing these shallow tasks, like reading the textbook, when in reality, you can get the same outcome or same grades by just focusing on a few or even just one task. And the way this was shown to me was that I had to pretend I only had 1 hour per day to study. And I would ask myself, what will I do? And I'll list out a couple of things. And then I had to ask myself, now, if I had 1 hour per week to study, what would I do? And then ideally I just keep crossing out things until I'm left with the one most important task. And the trick I found to make this actually work for me was I had to either actually study 1 hour per week or at least genuinely visualize myself doing so it becomes real. Now I did both, but I found visualizing more practical, and also exams are coming up, so you don't want to risk it. But just with visualizing, don't bullshit yourself. Actually pretend you had 1 hour per week to study for the entire year, because then you're forced to pick what the most important task is. And for me, it was doing practice questions and then writing down the errors I made. So questions, errors, and repeat. Okay, so you're probably unimpressed because doing questions isn't this groundbreaking thing. But let me ask you this. Basically, every student does some form of practice questions or practice exam, but the results vary so much. So why is that the case? Well, it's definitely not the number, because there's some people that only do a few practice exams, but end up doing better than those that do hundreds. Well, the difference is that top students will keep track of all their errors so that every mistake they make only occurs once. Because the value of doing practice questions is not the question itself, but rather what you do after. So that's why when I got a question wrong, I would write out my own detailed step-by-step solution to answer it correctly, because the same question won't come up again, but the same steps will. And the thing is, there's only so many ways examiners can ask a particular question. So if you keep writing down all your mistakes and learning from them, eventually you just run out of ways to fail. And this is why it's so important to focus on those high-yield tasks, like doing questions, because then your 1 hour of quality work is more than what most people finish in a week. Now, you might be thinking that's cap again, but if you really think about it, I used to spend a week making all these notes and I did no questions at all, and I would procrastinate here and there, so I was not prepared at all. So even if you just spend 1 quality hour on doing some practice questions, that's miles further than That's miles further than where young Julian was at. And I'll just add in here because I don't know where else to add it. But after I focused on just doing questions and writing mistakes, I would spend around 1 to 2 hours each day studying, and then closer to around 4 hours near exams. So that's a massive reduction from the 8 hours that I was initially used to. And at the same time, I ended up scoring the top 1% in most of my subjects. So I cut down the time I studied in half just by trying to study 1 hour per week. Now, I usually promote another one of my videos here, but for this one, I've got an actionable step for those that actually want to change their grades. Ask yourself this: if you had 1 hour a week to study, what would you do?